Welcome, everybody, to today's Ceros Educate webinar entitled Spring Cleaning. Hopefully that intro song was giving you springtime vibes. It felt very bright to me. That's why I went with it. But in today's session, we are going to be going over some best practices for how to organize your Ceros experiences at the admin account level and also in studio, and take a look at a very messy and an organized layers panel on the same experience. And my name is Travis. I will be your host for today. I am the digital content educator on the Ceros Educate team. And in my nearly 4 years of being at this organization, I've seen a lot of experience setups, a lot of account setups, lots of different types of organization, good and bad. And I think I'm in a unique spot to share some best practices and some do's and don'ts on how to organize your content. So I'm very much looking forward to sharing this knowledge with you all today. Now, in our journey through organization, we are going to start in the admin and take a look at actually my own team's account, the Ceros Educate account, and show you how my team organizes our experiences within our project folders, while also giving some notes on other organization setups, because I realize that not every organization is the same size. There's different, um, constraints and um, things that might be going on with having multiple different brands, multiple different projects, content that needs to be sectioned off. So there's a lot of things to take into an account when you're organizing content in your Ceros admin. But we'll go over some kind of general best practices and how you can make sure that your content is as streamlined as possible in your admin. And then we'll jump over to Studio and look at a landing page experience. Two pages within that same experience, actually. One that is a complete nightmare and cluttered and unorganized, and then one version that is nice and tidied up. And we'll kind of go over the advantages of streamlining and organizing your content, offer some best practices when it comes to naming conventions and when to use groups and folders and all that stuff. So hopefully you'll leave this session feeling like you can make sure your content is nice and tidy heading into the springtime. Now, we're going to be covering a lot in a short span of time today, so I have no doubt there will be questions throughout this conversation today. So if you have questions, please drop those in the chat or the Q&A box, and we will have some time at the end of the presentation to go over those. But let's get to it, shall we? Let's take a peek behind the curtain at my very own team's account. This is the Ceros Educate account in the admin, if anyone was ever curious as to what our organization looks like here. And since we are a 6-person team, we're able to be a lot more focused and streamlined with how we organize our projects than what other organizations might be facing, just because, again, of different factors with the number of brands they're working with, how many users, all of that stuff. We are able to keep a pretty lean and clean admin right here. So how we organize our experiences and educate is we will have them on a per project basis. So recently we started our community spotlights initiative, which has been off to a great start. And everything in this project folder will just be the finished published experiences for that initiative. And that is largely the case across most of our projects in the admin. You're not going to find too many drafts or backups or sketches or riffs on certain experiences. We'd like to keep our organization clean so that the main working or published version of those experiences are the ones in their respective project folders. So that would be my first point of kind of general best practices to offer you today when it comes to admin organization is when you are working on experiences, I would try to limit yourselves to only keeping the main versions of those experiences in their respective project folders, at least when they're finished. If you're working on experiences and are iterating on things or maybe just trying out ideas, I think it's okay to keep those duplicate copies in that same project folder. But once an experience has gone out into the wild and you're distributing it to your viewers, I would keep your project folders lean and put any extraneous experiences into a separate project folder. Maybe you can have like an archival folder or a backups folder, something like that. You don't necessarily have to delete those old experiences, but just keeping them separate from the main published versions will allow you and your team to search and find those main working versions a lot more quickly. And that is kind of exhibited here in my account, where, well, the team's account, where we have an archival folder for a presentation example that was done a while back. So we've got archival and even old labeled project folders in here to, again, really section off the old or archived versions of experiences from the main current content. Now, I recognize, again, that other teams that are more than 6 people are going to have different challenges when you're organizing your content. A lot of that comes down to the permissions that you give in the team tab, right? So kind of sectioning off content by creator level permissions and who has access to which project folder. But what if you have an account with multiple different brands and users or products that you need to have kind of more sectioned off, but you can only organize them in a single level project folder? Well, for something like that, then you might want to label your project folders as such. So let's say, for example, I was sharing our Educate account with my customer support team, and they had some projects in here. In that case, I think it would be a good idea to just add a little bit more of an indication as to which team, which brand, whatever it is, owns that specific project folder. So something as simple as, like, in parentheses, like support or support team, or whatever other brand it is. That way you're more easily able to find these sectioned off projects and experiences, rather than just having to guess who owns which project folder and which experience in your large account. But all of that, my friends, is going to change very soon. So some of you are aware that my product team has been hard at work at developing subfolders within the admin. And I am excited to announce today that sometime this quarter, those will finally be a thing for our users. So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek. I have turned the beta version of this on in my account, my private account. And now you can nest, I think, something like 100 project folders in your account. I can see the excitement in the chat. Yes, it is finally coming, everybody. So again, this is just the working beta version right now. It might look different in the final version, but my product team is targeting to release these generally within this quarter. But this is going to completely change the game when it comes to organizing your content in the admin, right? Because now it's not just going to be single level project folders. So like in that scenario I just talked about, if you have multiple teams or brands or things going on in your admin, it'll be a lot easier to section that stuff off and organize stuff within subfolders so that it's all self-contained on a per brand or even per like initiative basis. It's just going to be so good. Gene says, if you move the folders, will the link change? No, it will not. Everything will stay the same. And we'll have more details coming out soon about project folders or subfolders, I should say. But the live links or any of that stuff will not change. They'll just stay the same. Yes, they're coming soon. Finally, everybody. We're targeting a May release. I can't give you an exact date, but that is what the product folks told me. But sometime this quarter, we will finally see subfolders, and that will make organizing your content in your admin so much easier. But more to come on that. Cool. So really the main takeaways here for now, until we get subfolders in the admin, are just be really deliberate with your placement of your content in your account, right? Just make sure that any extraneous experiences are put in like a backups or an archived or an old folder, whatever the case may be. Try to keep the main content on its own in their primary project folders. That way everyone knows what the current versions are and they're easier to find in the search bar. And then if you have an organization, if you're an organization that has multiple teams or projects or users that you need sectioned off content that's more descriptively labeled, just add those to your naming conventions. Like I said, maybe in parentheses, just to kind of more to better communicate who owns those specific project folders. But again, that's going to change largely once subfolders become a thing, because it'll be a lot easier for you to nest that content in those subfolders. All right. And now let's take a look at an Experience Studio side. and talk about organization from the studio level. And I see some questions coming in. Don't worry, we will answer those after I get through this studio talk. But this experience right here is an Educate produced piece that we call the new member landing page. And I have two versions of this same experience. This one right here, as you can see, there's just a bunch of layers hanging out in my layers panel. It is a nightmare. And then I also have another page that I'll show you in a moment that is nicely organized into folders in groups. But before we talk about best practices, for everyone that's viewing this live, take a look at these layers really quick. What stands out to you? How would you tackle the organization here? What are some things we could do to make this more streamlined and easier to tell, what content belongs to which section? What would we do here? Gene says folders and or groupings. Absolutely. What else? Take note of what the hotspots are called. Group by section, headers, and then each section, Sam says. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah, it's just a jumbled mess right now, right? It's really hard to tell which layers belong to which section. Ooh, Amy's got the big one. Name hotspots, 1000%. Absolutely. Yeah, because right now, everything, you can't really tell what the hotspots do. You don't really know which layer belongs to which section. I mean, sure, you can click on a layer on your canvas and then find it in the layers panel. But if I was opening up this experience for the first time that someone passed to me, I would have no idea how this is sectioned off. I would have to kind of piece that together by clicking on things on the layers panel. And that would just take a crazy amount of time. Jingo's name, everything. Yes, absolutely. These are all really good points, everybody. I would cry, Beth says. Yeah. And believe it or not, Beth, I've seen a lot of experiences that are this organized. I'm like, how do you do this? Why are you doing this to yourself? This is just pain. It's brutal. So yes, first and foremost, absolutely would be to section these layers. And I would probably do that as you were building this out, hopefully not after you've already created everything. But if you are inheriting something like this, I would, try your best to sort through these layers and organize them into groups or folders. So let's look at a much nicer version of this on the next page. Oh, it's like a breath of fresh air, right? So we've got all the sections neatly organized into folders right here. I would also be deliberate with the ordering of your layers here too. And by the way, if you weren't aware, you can make groups and folders within the layers panel down here at the bottom. There's also some keyboard shortcuts for that too, and also some right-click shortcuts and things that you can do within the contextual toolbar. I would assume that most people that are watching this webinar know how to group and put things in folders already, but if you don't, they're right here. But yes, I would start there, keeping your layers in folders or groups, depending on how many sections you have. I think you don't have to be as meticulous with your organization if you have a micro piece of content or something that's going to be embedded and it's just a really small experience. But for something like this, I would definitely organize it by section because it'll be a lot easier to figure out, which layers belong to which section. You can jump to different sections in the layers panel by pressing the space bar on your keyboard with that section selected, right? There's just so many advantages beyond just peace of mind to organizing your content. But I would also reflect the ordering of the layers on the canvas in the layers panel as well. So my header section in section 1 is up top here. And then I just go down section by section until we reach the footer. And then after we've got things sectioned off, then I would go, again, assuming that I inherited the cluttered version, if I didn't already preemptively do this, I would try to be descriptive with my naming conventions for other components, especially groups. So, if it's a tile, call it tile, whatever it is. Or if it's a pop-up, just be more descriptive than just generic group names, because it'll be, again, easier for you to find those things in the layers panel. And then the big one that someone mentioned, I think it was Amy, is renaming hotspots. Oh my goodness. Please, 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 please rename your hotspots. Just because if you don't rename them and they're just generically named hotspot 1 through, however many you have, that doesn't give you any indication as to what they do. in your layers panel. And if you're working on this experience with multiple users, they're going to have a really hard time discerning what the function of those things are without looking at the interact panel. That's just an extra step that they have to do. Also, whatever you call your hotspot studio side is what they'll show up as in your analytics. So, really, the more descriptive, the better. It's going to benefit you when you're looking for things in studio, when you're sharing experiences and collaborating with others, and also when you're going back to look at your metrics. So, all those things will benefit you by renaming your hotspots to be more descriptive. And another thing to note here is occasionally I'll get asked, what's the difference between folders or groups? Or do you have a preference? Or is there a reason to use one over the other? And that's a great question. All great questions. And with folders, those are really just there for overall organization purposes. Just so, you can organize sections, modules, things like that, so that they're neatly contained in your layers panel and can be expanded or collapsed at any time. Groups can be used for organization, but groups are more designed to treat layers as a single unit. So things like buttons or tiles or carousels. I mean, anything that you need to treat as a single unit, right? So I would recommend to group objects together that are component based or CTAs or buttons, any of that stuff. And then if you've got a long scrolling page like this with multiple sections, I would put those layers into folders. But there is one caveat there. If you are working on an experience that needs to be built for accessibility for screen readers, then I would avoid using folders and only organize your content with groups, because groups communicate to screen readers the reading order of your content. So if that's your case, if you're building content that needs to be accessible, I would try to avoid folders and build content with groups exclusively. So you could imagine the same setup right here within groups, just parent groups and children groups instead of folders. But that's only specific to accessibility things. And if you're more curious about that, we won't spend a lot of time talking about accessibility today, but if you're more curious about some tips and tricks for building accessible content, we have a whole section on Educate with some great resources and even a walkthrough tutorial from our accessibility advisor, Christina, on how to build accessible content in Studio. So I would encourage you to check that out. But again, big key takeaways here from organizing content in Studio is if it's a bigger page like this, organize your content into sections, please, whether those be folders or groups. Be more descriptive with your naming conventions, especially when you're creating new groups and hotspots, just because those things will be generically named when you create them. And then once you've finalized the design and you've got everything organized and squared away, if there are any extraneous layers, if there's any assets that you don't need in this experience, I would clear them out of there, just because it's going to eliminate the layer clutter. If you don't need something in this experience, you don't really need to keep it in your layers panel. Now, if you don't want to outright delete it, you could always move that asset to another experience, or you could save that to the asset library. That way you can come back to it in another experience and not lose those assets. So a quick note about the asset library. I would also keep your asset library incredibly organized. So make sure you're utilizing categories, which you can rename and delete and move stuff around within at any time. That way you can have all of your buttons, your text, your images, any modular components, interactive components neatly categorized and organized so that they're easier to find and reuse across all of your content. So again, just to quickly review, step one is organize your content into folders or groups, especially for longer pages. Rename your layers, especially groups and hotspots, so that they're more descriptive as to their function and implementation in your design. That goes doubly so for hotspots, honestly. And then trim the fat. Get out any layers that you don't necessarily need in this experience so that it's less cluttered and you have a very streamlined and organized experience. And I would also make sure you order your experience from top to bottom as it falls on the canvas as well. If you follow all of those steps, I think you'll be in a good place and have a much cleaner layers panel for your experiences. Now, I know that was a lot of information and a lot of best practices in a short span of time. So now I'm going to pass things over to our awesome audience and answer some questions that I see piling up here in the chat and the Q&A box right here. We'll start with the chat ones. Ivy's got one right here. I've always thought that folders can hinder accessibility and that groups are preferred. Is that true? Yes, absolutely. As I touched on, you're going to want to use groups because those will communicate to the screen readers what the reading order is of those layers. So yes, absolutely. Use groups over folders if you're building with accessibility in mind. Renee's got one. What's your personal guideline for differentiating between folders and groups? Like kind of what I talked about earlier, Renee. So folders are primarily there just for organization purposes, whereas groups can be used for organization, but they're mostly to treat multiple layers as a single unit. So again, things like buttons, tiles, pop-ups, all of that stuff. Well, that's really the key difference there. Ooh, a couple ones here in the Q&A box. Can Ceros owners choose which project folders each creator can view? Yes, they can do that. How can I limit who has access to which projects/project folders? Yeah, so that's going to be done in the admin right here. Unfortunately, I have a dummy account in here to show you this with. But yes, if you have creator level users in your account, if you go into the team tab right here as an owner level user, you can click on the folder access right here. And by default, everyone will have access to all the folders in your account. But if you select some folders, then you can go through and select the specific project folders that you want to give users access to. And with subfolders turned on, as we can see here, I can even drill down to specific subfolders in those parent project folders and give access only to those subfolders too. But again, more information on subfolders to come in the coming months. Next question. Can we recover experiences if we accidentally update them before duplicating the OG copy? Oh, goodness. If you delete an experience, you can, our support team does have the ability to recover some experiences. I'm not sure how far back that goes, but if you make updates to an experience, and then were to like close out of the studio or refresh your browser, those changes can then not be undone. So you can undo any changes in an experience within that session that you're working in until you've closed out of the tab or refreshed the browser. Once that closes, all of that undo history is gone. So I'm not sure whose question that was, but whomever is working on an experience, if you know you're going to make a lot of changes to it, I would just recommend making a backup of it, a quick duplicate before you make changes to the master copy. That way you have that other version before it was worked on to go back to, because there's really no way to undo those changes. Another question, can you move entire subfolders from one main folder to another? Yes, you can absolutely move subfolders between folders. As I can see here, I can drop that subfolder into one of my main folders right here. And again, you'll be able to nest these, I think, 100 some folders deep. So yes, they will be, you can move your folders anywhere within the account to another parent folder or within another subfolder. The possibilities are endless. Ooh, another question. This is a good one. Should hotspots always be at the top of the layers panel, and should we group the hotspots together or with the assets they are covering? Ooh, that is a fantastic question. So I would say, as a good rule of thumb, at least section by section, to keep your hotspots at pretty much the top of those layers in the hierarchy. That way they're not being covered up by other modules, layers, design elements in your experience, that they're fully accessible to your viewers. You don't necessarily need to keep them all at the top of your hierarchy, but as long as they're at the top of the hierarchy, section by section, you should be in a good place. And you could certainly add hotspots within groups as well, especially if you're considering adding things like buttons or pop-ups or tiles to the asset library. That way, all that interactivity is bundled together within that group. But that's kind of more of a personal preference thing, depending on the complexity of your design. I think the only real hard guideline I have there is just in terms of hierarchy, making sure that those hotspots are at the top of the layers on a per section basis so that they're not being covered up by anything else. Beyond that, I think it's kind of preference. All right. Can you apply interactions or animations to folders like you can groups? You can to some extent. I wouldn't really recommend it because depending on how much content you have in there, you might unintentionally activate something or trigger something that you didn't intend. And you're like, oh, now I have to figure out which layers I don't want to adhere to this behavior or animation within the folder. If it's something smaller scale, you might be able to do that. But I would try to avoid adding interactions and animations to folders unless it's a really contained folder. Like maybe you have like carousel slides in like a folder of their own. Maybe you could add animations to that folder, and then to all the children layers then, but that's kind of more on a specific use case basis. But I would still try to stick to applying animations and interactions to your groups or your hotspots, depending on what that element is, just as a good practice. All right. Is there a limit to how many subfolders and subgroups you can create in the layers panel? Ooh. And do you have a best practice for the number? Wow. If there is, I've never hit it. I think it really just depends on what the design is, right? I think for something like this where you have sections, you'll have your parent folder and maybe some children folders and groups within there. I don't think there's a hard limit on that. Yeah, again, it depends on the design. For something like this, I think you could just have your different parent section folders. If you want to have a folder for your hotspots, you could do that. You could even have a folder for your tiles and then place your tiles in a folder with all the the children groups. Again, it really just depends on the design. I don't think I have a true recommendation for the number of folders or groups on a per experience basis. It will really depend on the content, truthfully. And then I got a couple more. How can I easily select an asset that's deeply layered within groups? Sometimes it takes me a while to select an individual asset. Yeah, that can happen. Well, one thing I will say is if you've got a group where you want to, maybe select like this text box right here, what you could do is hold down the command key on your keyboard. And if you notice when I'm hovering over these layers that are nested within this group, there's a bounding box that appears around them, and that will allow me to select those layers within that group. Man, it goes, that's amazing. I know a lot of people aren't aware of that little shortcut. But yeah, if you hold down the command key and hover over layers within a group, this is great for editor users too. You can select individual children layers within those groups, and it's a lot easier. Little shortcut there. Okay. And then one more admin folder question. Right now on our company home screen, we see experiences in order of recently edited, and we see everyone's projects on the team. Is there a way to change that? Ooh, I'd like to hide projects that I'm just messing around with, like for Ceros courses. Oh, that's a great question, Beth. I don't believe there is. I think that's just kind of the general behavior, but that's certainly feedback that we could provide to the product team to see if there's a way that we could change like the ordering. I don't believe there's a way to do that, because yeah, when you go to the homepage, it's just going to show whatever experiences you've recently opened, right? I don't believe there's a way to change this behavior in like settings or anything, but it's definitely something to consider. Kind of like, even if it was an experience that you open, maybe you don't want that to appear in your recents and you want to have the ones that you've actually been actively working on appear here so that they're quickly discoverable. But yeah, as far as I know, Beth, it's just, whatever experiences you opened up last will appear here, in the hierarchy of when they were opened. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that was all our questions. So if there aren't any more, I think we can probably wrap there. But again, I hope this session was insightful for everybody, and we gave you some best practices on how to organize your content both in the admin and within Studio. But if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to my team on educate.ceros.com, and also check out our guides, videos, and stay posted on when our upcoming webinars are rolling out. From all of us here on the Educate team, We appreciate your viewership and we hope to see you again soon. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.